Good morning. My name is Gerrianne Waring, and I am Senior Chaplain with the Church at Work. Welcome to my presentation on Cism, otherwise known as Critical Incident Stress Management. Chaplain Mike Tamillo, our founder of Tcaw, asked that I would do a little presentation on what Cism is, and this little presentation I'm doing will become part of those who want to become chaplains, and perhaps a rehashing for those who need to hear this again, who are already chaplains. So welcome. Those of you who are interested in becoming a part of our chaplaincy with Tcaw, and to those who are already a part of chaplaincy. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I became a chaplain with Tcaw about 3 years ago. And prior to that, I've had 24 years experience as a social worker, working with children in foster care primarily, and also adoption. And one thing I learned during that time, I used to do a lot of training, and I learned as I went. And so I became fascinated really on the subject of trauma. And children in foster care experience a lot of trauma, having been removed from their home without their consent, without their understanding of what's going on. It is an extremely traumatic experience for a child of any age to go through that. And so I would begin doing trainings with incoming foster parents or prospective foster parents to help them understand a little bit better of what the dynamics are of these children who come into care. It's just become a fascinating subject to me regarding trauma. And I'm going to take just a little bit of time, maybe about 30 minutes, maybe less, to share a little bit of what I understand regarding Cism and trauma and how it affects adults, not just children, but adults, okay? Primarily adults, but you've got to remember when people go through any type of trauma, it knows no age limit or age limitation, okay? So keep that in mind when we're going through this little presentation, okay? So let's just talk about what Cism is. And I already said it stands for Critical Incident Stress Management. Cism has been around for at least 40 years, well-renowned, acknowledged and received in all facets of first responders, police, fire department, chaplains all over the place of different backgrounds. Military recognizes Cism, so it's been around for a long time. Sadly, Cism was not something that had already come out when it referred to Vietnam vets. Vietnam vets. A lot of them later on in life now are going through some training or some understanding of what was going on with them. A lot of people experience post-traumatic stress disorder and are going through Cism to kind of have some type of normalcy in their life, okay? So that's a little bit about Cism. I don't want to go deep into it. It can be very complex, but it is a psychological method to use in helping people overcome stress in their lives due to trauma, okay? All right, so when do you use Cism? That's a very good question. And I'm going to say when and where, and spend a little bit of time addressing both of those at the same time. As I mentioned before, it is used after a traumatic event. Some of us chaplains do disaster relief. Some of us chaplains might be helping a victim of a car accident or survivor of a car accident. Some of us may be dealing with survivors of a past or post-traumatic type event. There's all different types of situations where trauma occurs and when Cism can be used. And I do want to say this about trauma. Okay? When a person has a traumatic experience, even if it happened a while back or many years ago, trauma sits right here. That the frontal lobes keep that trauma right there. So what that means to anyone who has been through a traumatic experience, and you may have, you can't stop thinking about it. It's there all day long. It's on the forefront of your brain. Consequently, you try to function in some type of normalcy, go to work, have a family, raise your children. Whatever the case may be, you're trying to go back into functioning a normal life, but it's very difficult when you have trauma sitting right there, okay? And what does that do to the person? It can cause nightmares. It can cause dysfunction in relationships, problems sleeping, problems eating. It can cause addictions, sex addictions, alcohol addictions, drug addictions, food addictions. It can cause a lot of havoc in your life if you have not released that trauma, okay? So keep that in mind when dealing with people who have been through any type of trauma. What you want to do and what needs to happen is the trauma needs to move from here to back here, somewhere in the brain. Doesn't mean you're never ever going to forget about what happened to you, but you'll have a different perspective of it. And it will hopefully, with some help, change some behaviors that you have. Maybe you'll begin sleeping better. Maybe you'll begin eating wiser. Maybe you'll wise up to the type of relationships that you were having before. It does help to talk about your trauma. But when we as chaplains meet up with people, we may only have one time, one opportunity. We're not therapists. We're not counselors. We are not here to change their life like that. Only the Holy Spirit can do that. Amen? But in this world of meeting so many people who may not know the Lord and some may not come to know the Lord while we're sitting there in front of them. So keep that in mind, and we'll get more into this in a little bit as to what we do. But the when and where go hand in hand because, again, you might go to a disaster and that's when you would use Cism. You might pull over on the side of the road and having just come to the scene of an accident, then that's when you would use Cism. Okay? I'm trying to think if there would be another incident. Well, and if you're at work, of course, you are with people all day long, all day long. Some may have come to work that day having experienced some trauma over the weekend. Their husband left them, their wife left them. Maybe they were out for a week or two and they lost a loved one. So they were home, taking care of the grief process. And that doesn't mean they're finished just because they went back to work. Grief takes a long time. And some people never get over it. And it depends too. Sometimes the grieving process is even harder if that individual died suddenly, tragically. Sometimes, grieving's hard. I don't care what process you're in. And it may depend on the type of relationship you had with that individual, if you were extremely close. So I just say all that to say that when you're at work and you see a coworker come in who hasn't been around for a while, maybe you don't know them well, but you do recognize that they haven't been there for a while. I would say as a chaplain, pray for those opportunities to meet privately with that person. Pray for a divine appointment. That's the best thing you can do. And have some opportunity. Take them to lunch or sit down with lunch with them. If they're sitting outside, where I used to work, we had picnic tables. You could sit outside and join them and have that opportunity to let that person talk. Here's the thing about trauma. Because it sits right here in the front, that's all an individual is going to talk about. They may talk about it 10, 20, 100 times a day. That is consuming that person. Okay, trauma is consuming. A car accident. My brother went through one a couple of years ago. I guarantee you he talked about it quite a bit. Anything that we've been through that's traumatic, or violates us in some way. We're hurt, we're angry, we're grieving, and we have to talk about it. Okay, so keep that all in mind when you think about trauma and what people go through, what you even may go through. Maybe you need to talk to somebody. Keep that in mind, okay? Because we're not a better individual until we get that trauma out of our head, or at least from right here, okay? Because right behind our frontal lobe are our eyes. And our eyes see a lot. Our eyes experience a lot. They cry, they laugh, they're sad, they're happy. What do they say? Eyes are the windows to your soul. Well, if you have trauma, you're traumatized and your soul is traumatized. I can guarantee you. So I hope that makes some sense there for you before we get into a little bit more. I guess I'm going through the who, what, when, where, why, and then we'll do the how. Why kind of fits into what I was just talking about. Why would you use Cism? Because there are a lot of hurting people out there, and they need to be set free. They need someone to talk to. And again, they talk about their experience over and over, or maybe they need to talk about it and they're not. And they're stuffing it and they're pushing it down, thinking that it's gonna go away. My brother recently talked about Prince Harry, and he just came out on the news after his mother died 20 years ago. He was stuffing his emotions and his feelings about his mother's death, thinking that by doing that, he could deal with it somehow. Well, he ended up having dysfunctional relationships, lots of drinking, and he recognized over the past 2 years when his brother, Prince William, brought this up to him, you need help, brother. You need some help. So he did get help, and he acknowledged publicly that this was a problem for him, and I applaud Prince Harry for doing that. It's sad that he carried this around with him for 20 years. That's a long time, and a lot of time wasted, if you ask me. That's a lot of time wasted. Another thing that I think is very important along with Cism, and I say this because I was thinking about Prince Harry, I hope that he forgave whoever was involved in his mother's death. There was a lot of supposition about how she died. Was it an accident? Was it pre-planned? We can be angry and walk around in anger and bitterness if we don't forgive. So we need to forgive, and not for that other person. That doesn't absolve that person that we're angry with. That doesn't take away from what happened, but it does help us, the individual who's angry and upset and bitter. It helps us. It frees us. It lets that pain go to some extent. And if that trauma is still there, then yes, you do need to deal with that. But you also, this is just a little side note, forgiveness is extremely important. And like I said, it doesn't totally absolve that individual who hurt you, but it will free you and help you to feel better, I guarantee you. Okay? So we said the why. So now let's get into how. How is Cism important? How do we use Cism? Okay? There's numerous different ways, and when I went through training, I remember how many years ago what it was now. My brother and I both went through an organization called Austin Disaster Relief Network, and I do need to give them credit because they hosted Melissa Slagle. Melissa Slagle has been doing Cism for many, many years. She even works with Vietnam veterans and helping them with their PTSD. She's done some remarkable work with them. And one of the things that she did in the presentation that she did, or the workshop that she did with us one weekend, was she did some presentations on the different types of things that you can do or techniques that you can do to help an individual when you're doing Cism with them. Okay? Before I get into that, there was something I did want to mention, and I need to mention it now. there are various different types of processes. Some are really deep and very complex, and a lot of police stations do this. A lot of police officers learn this type of training when it comes to Cism. Ours is very simple, and I'm going to go through some phases. There's 7 of them, and I want to cover those real quick, and then I'll talk about some other of those little techniques at the end. But this is really the most important piece when it comes to how to listen to a person who is traumatized. And I think about a couple of floods that we've had in Central Texas. I think about the tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, and the fertilizer plant that exploded in West Texas. I met quite a few traumatized people, okay, and used the Cism process here in helping people to talk. Now, it's going to seem kind of step by step. Sometimes they're going to start talking and they've already covered some of those steps. So you don't need to go back and cover what they've already said. You just need to listen, and I call it active listening. Sometimes you might need to repeat what that person said so that they understand, and I'm talking sentence by sentence, not the whole paragraph or however long it took them to talk. But as they say something, so I understand, say something like, so what I understand you saying is, you were over at the river, you were hiding in a tree. Say those kind of things to let them know you're really listening to them, okay? So what you do when you're meeting up with somebody is introduce yourself, tell them who you are, who you're with, and I'm here to listen. And then begin by asking them, where were you when this happened? I'm sorry, I have to put my glasses on now. Where were you when this occurred, when the tornado came? Where were you? And they're going to begin to tell you the story. And you can also say what happened then to kind of engage them, because maybe they're going to be stuck. So you might want to say, so what happened then? And get them to start telling you the story, okay? And then that was the fact phase. Number two, introduction phase is number 1. Fact phase is number 2. Thought phase is when you really get them to think, and you say something like, what was the most significant to you about this event? Well, some people may say that I'm still alive. That was most significant. Or I still have my car. I still have my job. I still have my house, my family. They're going to tell you what was most significant. It gets them to think. It kind of slowly starts moving things around in their head. Okay? Number 4. The reaction phase. Have you felt like this before? Now, they may say I felt extremely anxious. I felt extremely scared. So some people may not have ever had those feelings before. So you might want to ask them, have you ever felt this way before? When did you ever feel that way before? To get them to talk more about what they're feeling, okay? Number 5 is the symptom phase, okay? Symptom phase goes like this. So what's been happening to you since the event? And some people may say to you, well, I can't sleep at night. I have nightmares continually. I keep dreaming about my family disappearing, the tornado picking them up and taking them away. Or I can't eat. I don't have an appetite. So that gives you, in your mind, some notes to put there to say, okay, we're going to come back to this, okay? But get them to tell you everything that they can think about, everything that they can relate to you about what's been happening to you since the event, okay? Number 6. Yes. This is the teaching phase. This is where you want to implement. And I talked about the techniques I was going to talk about at the end. Well, I'll put it in here now. The teaching phase has a couple of different things that you can do, and it's very simple. You can teach them the breathing technique, okay? Put your pinky over your belly button. Take a deep breath so that you feel your stomach expand, and then slowly let it out until you can't let out any more air, okay? So that would be the breathing technique. So let me do it again. I don't have a full length thing here. Maybe I can do it standing up. But you can do this laying down as well. Put your finger over your belly button. Take a deep breath through your mouth, and then, no, through your nose. I'm sorry. Let's do it again. And then you let it out, and you'll feel your stomach go in and go out. It's like a billow, you know what a billow is? So you can do that laying in bed at night. Sometimes when I have had some anxious moments, that's what I've done. Okay? And it works. And I usually fall asleep. Stress reduction technique. Again, the breathing is a good one. Another one is counting. It's like counting sheep, but just start back from 100, 100, 101, 100, 99, 98. And you can do that, and I guarantee you'll fall asleep. Another thing is listening to some soothing music. You can listen to some Christian music, listen to some classical. There's some simple things you can do at night that will help you fall asleep. Drink a glass of warm milk before you go to bed. That's always a good one. Okay? So then after you've taught those, another thing you want to interject here, I'm sorry, I forgot to add this very important thing. They may not get relief right away, and hopefully you may, as a chaplain, as a Christian chaplain, you may want to ask them about their background. Do they know Jesus? Do they pray? Prayer is a big thing. Prayer is an extremely big thing. That can lead you into sharing more about who you are in Christ. Get them to talk about who they are as believers. Are they believers? But the other important piece I want to add here is they may need to get some therapeutic help. They may need to get a counselor, therapist to meet with them for a little while, okay? And hopefully, if you're in a setting like a disaster relief setting, like we've had floods and tornadoes and that kind of thing, you can get some information to be able to pass on to them. Now, granted, if you're at work, I do want to add a little bit here. If you're at work, you're not going to be able to go through all of these processes, but you might want to keep them in mind because you could still ask them, so what happened then? Where were you? After a while, these phases, like I said, they're step by step because they're in writing and they have numbers. But you can roll those things off the top of your head after a while and you'll be able to have a conversation. Let them do the talking, most of it. Please do not share, and I have to say this, do not share, oh yeah, I went through that too. I remember a time back in 1980, blah, blah, blah. No. Do not share your story with them. It may be later, some other time, but when you're going through the Cism process, the Cism process, I should say, with the individual, like I said, going back to talking about trauma, you want them to get better. You want them to talk, okay? Now, again, work is not always the right place to do this kind of thing, but you can do a short version, you can do a mini version. You just want to get the people to talk, okay? Then you want to do the wrap up, which is number 7. And I love this question because it really helps put things in perspective for these people, for these traumatized people. What possible good came out of this awful situation? And I can tell you, it's amazing. People have lost their homes, their cars, their job, whatever it is, but they are able to find something good that came out of that situation. And when I was in Moore, Oklahoma, some of these people, a lot of the ones we met, lost their home. But the biggest thing that came out of that, the best thing that came out of that for them was that they still had their families. They were still together. They had their friends. Some did lose some loved ones. But I'll tell you what, it puts things in perspective when you've been through some type of trauma. I can remember the only thing I can think of is when my brother had his car accident and there were 5 of them in the car. Thank God his wife wasn't there in the car with him. She stayed at home that day. Thank God nobody walked away with any major bumps and bruises or broken anything. That's another wonderful thing that something good came out of it. So I use that as an example. I'm sure Mike doesn't mind that I did that. But, I think about, we have to look at the brighter side on it in every situation. If we can look at a positive thing that came out of a bad thing, it really, really does put things in perspective and helps us to appreciate where we're at now. God is in the middle of this. God is in the middle. When you're ministering to somebody or listening to someone tell their story, of course I ask, please pray before you do that and invite the Holy Spirit to come in and be a part of what you're doing, okay? I know I went through this pretty quickly in about almost 30 minutes here, but this is the beginning of your journey. This is the beginning for you. And again, I welcome you. I'm excited for you to be a part of the church at work. And we'll go on from here to learn a whole lot more together, I can assure you. So thanks a lot and have a blessed day. Take care. Bye-bye.